Next up, we have Dunsparce and Emolga. I think it's pretty hard to talk about one without the other, so there's going to be a decent bit of jumping between who I'm talking about during this part. You meet the pair on your first mission from Azumaril's board, which is to save Dunsparce. While going through the dungeon, you encounter Emolga. He's surprised that anyone took up the offer to help him search for Dunsparce and describes him this way, quote, "Dunsparce is my best friend, got it? But he's a bit of a coward, really, and he's always messing up. Pretty much whenever he does anything, he ends up needing someone to bail him out. So, I was getting a bit worried and decided to look for him myself," unquote. This tells us two things. Emolga sees himself as a protector for Dunsparce, and similarly, he doesn't think highly of Dunsparce's ability to fend for himself. You rescue Dunsparce and everyone returns to paradise. Emolga tells Dunsparce that he should stop being so reckless. Dunsparce gets sad and says that he just wants to be the one that does the rescuing instead of the one being rescued. But he's not strong, and he gets afraid and he loses his nerve when the big moment arrives. Emolga points out that while Dunsparce is right that him acting like a coward does get him in trouble, his heart is in the right place, which is hard to find these days. From this, we can deduce that Emolga genuinely does put high value on Dunsparce's morality and really does want the best for him because he hasn't shown a lot of patience for the other parts of him. I mean, you don't call your friend a coward unless you really think that they need to directly hear that. On second playthrough, I found it interesting that directly after this, Dunsparce just spoils his entire arc in plain sight with this quote. It would be nice to explore all kinds of different places on adventures, of course, but really, I'd just like to help Pokemon around the world who are in trouble, unquote. He actually says something very similar a few more times throughout the first half of the game. Of course, without the context of what the bitter cold actually is in mind, it's easy to just gloss over this and see it as some filler text. It's a nice touch, but we'll be getting back to that later in the game when it's relevant again. Right after this, the player, partner, Dunsparce, and Emolga go to Swana's Inn so Dunsparce can bring a gem to Virizion. Virizion says she can't accept it, says Dunsparce can't help her because he isn't strong. Dunsparce takes this to heart and runs out of the inn, which should be no surprise because he's being emotionally hit on two different fronts here. One, the fact that he was rejected by Virizion, who he really likes, and two, because the reason why he was rejected was because he's weak. This is Dunsparce's biggest insecurity. The guy has serious self-esteem issues because he deems himself weak, and it's pretty undeniable that he is indeed physically weak. In Bitter Cold Era Post Town, he sees strength as the only way to reach his goals of both being able to help others and to just be more respected, but he's clearly not there yet. Having Virizion directly point out what Dunsparce deeply believes due to his insecurities but doesn't want to talk about, that he's not valuable because he's not strong, really hit him hard. Dunsparce then falls for the Pawniard Brothers scam, and as a result needs to once again be saved. Meanwhile, Emolga the Protector is livid at Virizion because he knows she cut deep at Dunsparce. He then runs off to try and save Dunsparce from getting into trouble without a second thought. Once he finds him, Emolga is mad and talking big smack to the Pawniard Brothers, demanding that they leave him alone, and then later taunting them once the reinforcements come. He stays heated even after the fight. The partner invites Dunsparce and Emolga to join the party. Emolga doesn't really care at first, but once he sees how happy this acceptance makes Dunsparce, he decides that he'll join too. But immediately after, Virizion tries to join the party as well, and Emolga isn't having any of that. He hasn't forgotten that Virizion hurt his friend just a short time ago, even if she arguably made up for it already by helping out against the Pawniard Brothers. Virizion actually accepts this criticism and says it's justified, but asks for forgiveness. Emolga isn't listening though. He just wants no business with her, and that's that. Of course, the partner does not comply with Emolga's request, and Virizion joins the party. I think that above all, the aspect of this particular relationship that has kept Dunsparce and Emolga so close has to be the protector and protectee dynamic. Like mentioned earlier, Dunsparce highly values strength and sees it as his only way to get closer to his goals in this world. The funny thing is, Emolga actually also shares this mindset. It's just that while Dunsparce is close to Emolga because he accepted him, and it helps that Emolga is very loyal as well, Emolga is so attached to Dunsparce in particular because acting like a protector is empowering to him. Of course, he also values Dunsparce's purity, as we discussed earlier, but at this point in the story, Dunsparce is not the only decent person he's encountered. What about the player and partner? At this point, they've gone out of their way to help Emolga out twice now. He didn't even really care about joining the party until Dunsparce wanted to. It's always about Dunsparce. The fact is, Emolga also thinks that being perceived as powerful is important. Why else would he have continually brought up how much Dunsparce being a coward annoys him? He wants Dunsparce to be physically stronger, because he too thinks that that's better for him. But Emolga is also most attached to Dunsparce because he feels comparatively powerful, and Dunsparce helps him fake it till he makes it. Emolga talks a big game all throughout the story, but like Dunsparce, he never actually really accomplishes anything without the help of the party. He just exudes more confidence than Dunsparce. Ironically, the rest of the party mostly sees through this and doesn't take Emolga that seriously, but he doesn't realize this until close to the end of the game. More on that coming up. Interestingly, this translates fairly well to the actual gameplay as well. Emolga has some great offensive options with his early stab, Spark, and then later on gets the insanely powerful single target acrobatics and multi-target shockwave, as well as some good utility in quick attack, double team, and light screen. However, he isn't even close to a one-man wrecking crew despite having all these tools, because he dies to just about everything. He needs constant support from the team to take advantage of his strengths. And while I'm at it, I should bring up Dunsparce's role in the gameplay as well, or rather, his lack of a role most of the time. So, Gates to Infinity makes the purposeful decision to not only allow you to never use Dunsparce in a dungeon, but actively discourage you from doing so. After all, Dunsparce is so weak, why would you ever want to use this guy? Immediately after Dunsparce, Emolga, and Virizion join your party, all at the same time, you have 5 party members, you can only use 4. Virizion and Emolga are both higher leveled and start with much better kits. Emolga, again, with stab and a good offensive typing, along with a defense reducer and quick attack, and Virizion with the same, except with dual stab coverage and double kick and magical leaf. Meanwhile, the only usable attack Dunsparce has right away is rollout. That's an okay move, with some high damage potential of course, but handicapped by a very low accuracy, especially before level ups, and the fact that it is not even stab for Dunsparce. Dunsparce's first stab option actually doesn't come until level 22 with takedown, and even then, recoil moves are kind of bad in PMD. This means that most Dunsparces will be running a hard support role if they are used in the party, except by the time Dunsparce actually learns good support moves, he's already outclassed because by that time, Umbreon has joined the party, who is not only bulkier, but has a starting moveset of Quick Attack, Stab Pursuit, Confuse Ray, and Sand Attack, and later gains access to Assurance and Helping Hand. Believe me, I tried to find some niche that Dunsparce could fill on the team that wouldn't just be me handicapping myself, but I really don't think it exists. Dunsparce is the weakest party member in the narrative and in the gameplay, and it adds to the dynamic of every time someone in the game brings up, that Dunsparce is weak. He's not good in battle. You can't really refute that. It's just kind of true, and the game makes it so on purpose. This brings us to before the first trip to the Great Glacier. Dunsparce is really excited to go and sees this as a real adventure. He tells Virizion that's what he wants to be, a real adventurer, and then be able to help others out. Again, repeating that thing from earlier, he accidentally says his arc. Dunsparce then points out that joining the party has helped him feel more confident. Virizion agrees and encourages Dunsparce to have a great time soaking in a new experience at the Great Glacier. Emolga is also listening in on this and is not only happy for Dunsparce, but seems to have cooled off a bit on his initial assessment of Virizion, because instead of being mad at her, he agrees with what she says to Dunsparce. Then comes the announcement that not everyone can go on the trip, and someone needs to stay behind. Poor Dunsparce, he starts quivering immediately, because in his mind, he knows that it should be him, because he's the weakest. Emolga starts to freak out, but Virizion interrupts and says she'll stay behind. But Emolga has now reached the point where he doesn't like that answer either. He's at the point where he considers Virizion a legitimate part of the team. Then comes the drawing straws scene. Dunsparce pulls the short straw, and while he's generally positive about it, he says a part of him does think he deserves it because he's still the weakest. Emolga then has a great character moment, definitely one of my favorite scenes in the game, by swapping with Dunsparce at the last second and shoving him into the Magna Gate right before it teleports everyone out to the glacier. Besides the fact that it's a selfless act to sacrifice that experience to help someone else out, this is major for Emolga in particular because he's still choosing to separate himself from Dunsparce, right? Like, Emolga now has enough trust in the rest of the party to look after Dunsparce instead of just him being the sole protector. And a good chunk of that is probably him having more faith in Dunsparce's abilities to hold his own. Plus, Emolga is taking the plunge to not be around Dunsparce nor the rest of the party and still try to keep up his psyche. He's gone from following Dunsparce everywhere as his main mechanism to keep his confidence up to being okay with the decision to be away from him for an extended period of time. And of course, this point I mentioned as being a main part of the art for the partner as well. So Dunsparce enjoys the trip, Emolga hangs in there at Paradise, and it all works out pretty much. Skip forward to the party reuniting after Kiram kills Hydreigon in the desert. It's implied that the partner explained everything going on with Kiram, Hydreigon, and the Bitter Cold. Umbreon, Espeon, and Virizion start to question their chances of success, and Emolga is genuinely shocked by this. And it makes sense, because while a lot of the party's struggles at the start of the game deal with their relationships with others, Emolga was always content, or at least acceptant, of the state of the world. Just not really satisfied with himself and his place in this new world. Dunsparce, of course, similarly doesn't talk about doom and gloom here because, as said earlier, he and Emolga are working their way through a similar struggle in different ways. Dunsparce then decides that he is going to stay behind on the second trip to the Great Glaciers so he can try and keep the town's spirits up. Previously, the partner tried to convince the town, but they came ill-prepared to deal with a crowd that disagreed with them. Dunsparce thinks that things will be different with him as the motivator. And it's easy to see why. He definitely believes what he's saying when he says that he has faith in not only the team on their trip, not only the world at large, but now himself, after coming to learn through being around the party that he isn't useless and unable to be liked just because of a lack of strength. Let's go back to his quote from the beginning of the game. It would be nice to explore all kinds of different places on adventures, of course, but really, I just like to help Pokemon around the world who are in trouble. The end goal was always just to help others. It's just that Dunsparce thought the only means of accomplishing that was becoming stronger. Now that he realizes this isn't necessary, he's ready to take his opportunity and help by being a positive energy in town. And he absolutely is. He, along with Swanna, confidently fill the town with assertions that things are going to work out. For every way that a townsperson tried to spin a new development in the most pessimistic way possible, Dunsparce was there to snap them out of it with a retort that made logical sense and was hard to argue with. Turns out that Dunsparce was a natural-born leader the whole time. To bring back the Rainbows of Hope discussion from earlier, there's actually one scene that I omitted from that segment, which of course is, after the first phase of the Bitter Cold, the post-town residents are all looking at the Glacier Palace, and it's looking bad. Dunsparce keeps encouraging everyone on, but the town almost instinctively assumes the worst. Despite this, the player is given enough of an opening to momentarily knock out the Bitter Cold and allow the Rainbows of Hope to reappear. How is this possible? Wouldn't more negativity from the town make the entity stronger? Well, the way I see it, the only explanation is that Dunsparce's words must have crept into the minds of everyone there. Even if they were still pessimistic on the outside, they started to realize internally that maybe they're wrong and Dunsparce is right. Then, once the rainbows appeared, it just snowballed from there. The town didn't get to see the rainbows again until they earned it, or maybe more accurately, until Dunsparce earned it, helping the town around him as a result. Roll credits. But not really, because we still skipped over an important part of Emolga's story. In the Great Glacier, the team split up into pairs of the player and the partner, Umbreon Espeon, and Virizion Emolga. There's this really great scene. I feel like I'm saying that a lot in this segment, but these two characters definitely shine a lot. Talking about the scene in which Virizion and Emolga are walking together through the dungeon. Though it's very obvious at this point that Emolga doesn't really have a problem with Virizion anymore, he's still somewhat trying to keep up the act around her to seem tougher, right? But Virizion, of course, sees right through this, and probably did from the beginning, and at this point directly asks Emolga if he hates her. Emolga is shocked at this sudden question, and couldn't manage to say yes. He walked through the process of how he grew to enjoy being around her and finally muttered the dreaded, "I'm sorry," and, and then follows that with, "Phew, that's a big weight off my mind," to which Virizion responds with, quote, "You know, Emolga, you're kind of a tough guy even though you're adorable. That's why I like you," unquote. Emolga is just completely surprised by this answer and just sits there shocked. So most interpretations that I've seen of Emolga's reaction here is that he likes Virizion romantically and was surprised to see that she returned the favor, but that's not primarily what I got from this. I mean, that's definitely like a distinct possibility, sure, but I guess what I got more is that Emolga, who is admittedly a little dense when it comes to reading others, but still, he was just surprised that Virizion was able to break him down so thoroughly in this conversation and reveal who he really is when Emolga was trying to mask himself. Let's return to that quote. "You're kind of a tough guy even though you're adorable." I imagine there's plenty of ways to interpret this and apply it throughout the game, but at least my reading of this was that Virizion thinks Emolga is adorable in that he tries to act tough. He always talks smack, fancies himself a leader, tries to be intimidating, wants to have people think that he's powerful and therefore be taken seriously, bringing it back to that point, etc., when mostly everyone in this game sees through that. but Virizion still says that Emolga is kind of a tough guy because he genuinely is a fiercely loyal and determined friend and person. That's what really makes him tough, because not everyone has those traits. There's no need for him to try to act tough in ways that he isn't. I also think part of Emolga's shock here is that he knows Virizion is right. It's pretty clear that he's had some desire to become closer friends with Virizion for basically the whole second half of the game, but he never had that official moment of reconciliation because he felt he had to maintain an image. And what an unnecessary reason that is. If he just opened up and acted like his inner self, like he did when already feeling comfortable around Dunsparce, well, who knows how many more positive relationships he could have made. He's still slightly in denial once he returned back to town, but progress is definitely being made on opening up a little.